Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Luticia Miller. How are you doing, Luticia?
I'm doing really well, Tyler. Thanks for chatting today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to Calgary Conspires. I always seem feel the need to either talk about the weather or talk about how we met. So Zanat from Alliance Trust, a very big supporter of her and the work she does in the city. I think she introduced us. You're also friends with Wilson Acton, another good mutual friend. Calgary Conspires, does it not? To put us all together.
2 complete gems right there, and yes, it does. It does.
I do love the biggest small town ever. We will talk a little bit. I am indulging to explore. We all talk about it's unique. We all talk about it's different. Where do we think that comes from? So we're going to park that for a little bit, but I'm trying to dig a little bit because as we grow and we expand and more people move into the city and rapid influx of net new migration, we're not losing the thing that makes us special, but let's be deliberate about it. So we'll park that one and leave that as a little nugget for the later. You are president at Drive Modular. You're also serve as the VP of Project Development with the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. I never pretend to want to do your bio for you. Tell us a little bit. What's Drive all about? And talk about your role with the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. And we'll launch from there.
Absolutely. Well, I think they both sort of stem from my industrial construction background. Let's talk about Drive first. So Drive, we provide workforce accommodations, aka camps and camp services, with a real eye to providing high quality camp services that offer essentially a home away from home, in respect of the hard work that, the men and women in our heavy industry and remote services do. We need to honor that and make the most of their time spent away from friends, family, and the like to do important work. And I work with First Nations Major Projects Coalition. So again, I love this organization, and I was a fan before I was employed with them.
That's awesome.
That's
a great way to start an engagement. I was a fan. I love it.
Exactly. So we support First Nations who are considering taking an equity position in major projects, and so we support everything from commercial deal structure, supporting their financial arrangements, legal. We don't offer legal support, but we coordinate those services, and to environmental and a big bent on advocacy. We've all seen the Indigenous loan guarantee programs that are being voiced throughout the country, and FNMPC has been a major part and contributor to those initiatives.
Are we getting better at that? The ability to bring different groups together, specifically this group, with major projects. There was such a period of time, it felt that in the media, there was always this adversarial tone that kept getting thrown out there. And I'm being very cautious, just because it was in the media, it doesn't mean it was true. But yet I talked to a lot of people in business from some of the nations that I've had on the show, and they're like, no, it's a lot more collaborative. We want, yes, there's different ways of working, and we need to understand how we all show up. But there felt like there was a lot more willingness than sometimes gets portrayed in the media. And again, I put everything with an asterisk of my own ignorance. That's why I love having people like you on the show to kind of clear the air around some of what's actually going on, quote unquote, in the day-to-day real world.
Absolutely. From my opinion, it is getting better. I sit at negotiation tables and do a lot of coordination in that space, and it really doesn't often feel like you're sitting across the table from, the other party or parties. It really feels like you're sitting at the table and you're collaborating on solutions, and I think everyone's heart is in the right place. Everyone's intentions are headed in the same direction. I think the overall sort of language that we're sharing across corporate Canada is increasing. We're getting onto a place where we can speak each other's language, and it is getting better. And also, that's sort of also represented in the arc of First Nations participation in major projects. Previous, it was a little bit more passive. Maybe it included some jobs, job creation and training. Then we came into the space where we're saying, well, hey, how about equity positions? And those equity positions were starting, nominal, 2 to 5%. And now we've almost seen a new standard set, which is, in some cases we're nearing that 50% equity position as sort of a starting point. And so when that hits, what happens is you're now developing the project arm in arm with your partners, rather than saying, hey, here's something we're doing and you can sit on the sidelines and watch. So it is getting better. It's a really exciting time to be a part of that industry.
That's a significant, just to camp out 2 to 5% starting place to 50%. Where now you're not just investing in the project, you're actually, like I love you said, arm in arm. So now, how does it impact our environment? How does it impact our communities? These are truly shared objectives now because we are both winning from this project, and these are large capital intensive projects over large periods of time that have large lifespans. I'm assuming as well. We're not talking about small projects here. We're talking about major initiatives.
Absolutely. We're talking everywhere from, power generation. We're talking about major utilities that serve not only the nations, but, the broader population base and critical infrastructure. Does
that joint approach of we're doing this together, there's been a rumor that we just can't get major projects done in Canada anymore, ... There's lots of rants that go after that statement that I've heard from many people over the last bunch of years. What I heard you say, that sounds like we're also maybe getting better at that. I don't know. I'm just trying to balance out if private sector and the First Nations groups are getting together and being more aligned. Is the government staying out of the way now that I don't know. I'm going down a weird little rabbit hole here. I have to be careful with what I'm asking.
I have to be careful.
What I'm asking, or I'm not asking. Are you seeing major projects like you talked about, power generation, things like that have large impacts across the board, from environmental to human to capital? Are we getting better at getting those done as well? I'm using getting better as a very generic term right now.
Well, we are getting things done. Are we getting things done quickly? No, I think we sort of have to adjust the benchmark for pace in Canada. But we are getting things done. And through these partnerships, with major industry or public infrastructure with First Nations partners, part of the value of that partnership is recognizing, what strengths does each party have? And so if we're talking about construction and project development, well, let's leave that securely in the hands of those who have done it repeatedly, who have a great history of execution. Let's lean on our leaders for that. Certainly, one priority that we want to keep is First Nations having a voice within during that phase, because we want to ensure that at the end of the day, every party's interests are served. But then, also lean on Indigenous leadership and on the strengths that the Indigenous partners bring to the table for where that best suits. We're talking about Indigenous-led environmental reviews. We're talking about, starting the conversation with communities rather than having communities be the last person to know that there's activity happening within their region or that people want to do projects with them.
That's a great way to get a bad reaction. Hey, surprise.
Exactly.
No, I don't like that. Especially if it impacts the world I live in. Especially the physical world I live in.
Absolutely. And, we can just imagine that there's many considerations that maybe, other parties aren't giving proper thought to. So let's start the conversation from the beginning. Let's avoid a lot of pitfalls that way and let everyone sort of operate in their field of strength.
I appreciate that. Is that, not to paraphrase, is that where you see some of the breakdowns at the early days? Like, we tend to look at the world from our perspective. And I have this rose-colored glass, these colored glasses, this filter, let's call it a filter. I have this set of filters of how I look at a project. Not that I don't care about those other elements. Sometimes I don't even consider them. Is that often where things break down in the early stage?
Completely.
Or do you see other things really show up in those early days of like, whoa, okay, we are far apart, back to your comment about being at the table together, not across the table or even farther apart than that?
Absolutely. Well, like I mentioned, I think, largely we all have the same intention and our direction is focused that way. And so it's not through any intentional, how do you say, it's more often just a blind spot. Okay. You don't know what you don't know. And that's why those early conversations are so critical at the beginning. So we can take a holistic view from the front end and strategize on how are we going to address each of these for everyone's project success.
And for yourself, kind of playing that role, coming with a deep background in industrial construction, I'm assuming that that's part of your superpower, if I may call it such, to be able to go, hey, let's not overlook this, let's not overlook that. Being able to kind of play both sides, that's a lot, and I appreciate that as an individual taking that role. of stewardship.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm a construction planner by trade, if you will, and so I think I've just been sort of trained to identify what is the sequence of events, what's critical path, what are the major risks that are going to stand in our way, but how do we look at those from afar and get ahead of them. We see those coming down the road. How do we avoid that?
There's going to be landmines, but if I know where they are, I can build the road around them, or just remove them safely. Probably remove them safely is a better way than divert the whole
exactly.
project.
Collision avoidance.
Yes, completely avoid the obstacle, remove the obstacle. You mentioned earlier, we were joking, lots of time in the air, lots of travel. Are you seeing, how does this look, Western Canada versus the rest of other parts of Canada? Is this pretty consistently across our great nation? Or is there some diversity about what's happening or what you're seeing happening, Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan versus maybe Ontario, Quebec, and otherwise?
That's a great question. And that's actually why I love my work with FNMPC so much, is because, I've spent most of my career here in Alberta, and we have a way of doing, and we have a strength and a maturity in several areas, obviously energy, but we also are talking about forestry, we're talking about infrastructure. And it's really interesting to be able to step outside the bounds of our province and see how are others doing it, how are other provinces operating, what are the new standards that have been set. We're talking about 50% First Nations participation in major utilities and infrastructure, like transmission lines, and that came sort of out of Ontario. It's happening in British Columbia as well. And so to be able to branch outside of our province and see how others are doing, and then lean on those new benchmarks, but then also take the maturity that we've secured and share those lessons. Our province, our projects are, I have projects right now that are in New Brunswick. And so the opportunity to take our lessons, right to the coast. It's never to say that, our way is best. It is always to say, what are the points that are worth gleaning from the experience on, say the West, and what's valuable to insert into our projects in the East, and vice versa.
Not to pick on the best or the less good. What are some of those strengths? Like, what are some of the things you see in Alberta aside from industry specific? Obviously, energy. There's certain things that we just have a lot of here, and we've been doing it for a while. But when you get into the nuance more of the ways of working or the attitudes or just what we bring to things, is there some of the things you see as standouts that are worth exporting to other places? Not saying they're better, but if I've been doing a certain thing longer than you and it happens to be effective, then hey, how can I learn from that as the person looking in on it, right?
Absolutely. And I am a very proud Albertan, through and through.
Yeah, powered. Yeah, I love it. I'm very pro Alberta, but everybody who knows me knows that.
Exactly. And I love my industry. Like, heavy construction has been, it's been my home for over 20 years, and awesome. I do love that. So I do have a natural pride for that. What we are good at is, I would say, planning and execution, the savvy in sort of the tech and operations that we have in this regard are worth consideration and are worth exporting. From an Indigenous engagement standpoint, I would say largely because of our natural resources base, there are many parts of Indigenous engagement that were sort of, I would say, born in Alberta and had the opportunity to mature in our area in terms of industry working with Indigenous communities. And
just because of the size and scope and scale of the amount of work we do with the resource sector across the province. Yeah.
The numerous opportunities to engage in that cycle, to repeat, to optimize, and to say what works, what doesn't, and how do we collectively improve. So those are things that I would say are worth consideration in other jurisdictions. And also it's just our attitude. We get things done. So
we get. I'll say GST. We get shit done in Alberta. We 100% do. Just get her done. I learned that when I moved here. Obviously, exactly. Each province has its own philosophy, but working with different nations, so many, so diverse. How's that aspect of it? Because from my understanding and from the outside, or having guests on the show, you can work with one nation and they operate a certain way, and you work with another and they operate totally differently. It's enough to have the provinces we have and even the jurisdictions, but inside that, how does that provide a dynamic? And are you seeing more kind of level setting there, or is it truly each one has their own identity and way of doing things?
Well, I think that's what keeps it, constantly interesting. And
you're never bored.
Never bored. Yep. And each community has, a beautiful identity and also a way of doing. So it it requires that you stay on your toes. It requires that industry stays on its toes. No two engagements are alike.
You
no
can't
two
just pull out the
business
playbook,
processes
right?
are
You can't
alike.
just say this
Exactly.
is the way we did it last time.
Exactly. So, the most important thing from my perspective is, entering with a humble heart, entering with a willingness to learn and to, and just ask questions, ask humble questions. And then, things will sort themselves out.
I love, and this maybe seems silly to say, but you use a lot of words that I love. There's me using humble, love. It's not words I necessarily associate with heavy construction. You can take that any way you want to take it. I'm assuming from the human that you are, bringing some of those to the table. I can only imagine over the years, there's been some times it's like, did she just say love at the table? Did she just say the word humble? How has that been on your journey of bringing, sounds like, a little more humanity to something that can look very heavy construction from the way big, broad sweeping stereotypes on my part over here, for sure.
No, absolutely. And I think that our industry as a whole, our language as a whole is, if you say, evolving,
okay,
and maturing to the fact that we understand that at the base of every negotiation, at the base of every engagement, is humans. And we need to connect on that level. That's the only way that we're going to understand, what does a person sitting at the table with me want to get out of this engagement? And what do I want? What does the group that I'm representing want? We have to be empathetic. And I think gone are the days where you were, a number representing a company. Now it's the personality and the people that make the companies, and that has to be honored. And that's obviously that stretches beyond the bounds of First Nations engagement.
This is being a good human.
It's being a good human, and it's
operating in 2024. That's my word, Cyrus. Yeah. And it feels like there's a lot more opportunity and need for collaboration, and a lot less opportunity for groups, communities to be bullied and to be pushed around when it comes to big projects. And we're just doing it. We don't care if you're on board. So you might as well take take what we give you and get out of the way, which feels like, again, it's portrayed in movies, we built the railroad. So many things you can look back on where it feels like those days have passed, rightfully so. Mm-hmm.
Yes, certainly. I would say the new standard would hope that they have passed. It's not to say that it doesn't continue to happen, but as I see it, it's almost like it's an immaterialized risk. And if that's how a project is being approached, that risk still exists in terms of what is the strife, and it's just been kicked down the road, and it will surface at a later date. So sort of bully at your own peril.
I love it. Circling back a little bit on just evolution and innovation and change, bully at your own peril. There's a t-shirt for you. You could have some swag on your side. Talk to me a little bit about Drive. Modular construction. It's something I know we have some clients in that space. That's an innovative, that's a different way that you and I joked off air. It makes a lot of sense, but still seems to be like modular is not a new concept, but it seems to take a lot of time to come to bear. Is that the construction industry being resistant to change? I don't know. This is part of your world now. What's your perspective on just modular, maybe in relation to here's a new way of doing it? Oh, new. Ooh, sounds scary. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, and it's sort of like a resistance to embracing the learning curve that is inherent in every change. So modular construction is something that I've had my eye on for 15 years. As somebody who's a project controls analyst and scheduler, my eye was always on efficiency. So it really was. But how do we do what we need to do faster and better with fewer injuries and with greater quality? And modular, it just seems to fit the bill. Like, hey, we're talking about building within a controlled environment. We're talking about having more repeatable models. But again, of any change, it comes with a learning curve, and it can be really tough to get people to embrace that and not see that as a deterrent, but see it rather as just a beautiful part of the process.
I love you have some great quotes, quotable quotes from Luticia today. We're not resistant to the change, we're resisting to the learning curve that comes with the change. I think that's so powerful. About, I was even having a conversation with my business partner yesterday. I work in marketing and MarTech and all the million. He's like, oh, this platform and that platform. I said, yeah, but look at some of the platforms we have now. And you could take 6 people and they're all using it a little bit differently. Like the human element cannot be overlooked for a second on the promise that technology will solve all your problems. and it just doesn't. But every company with technology will tell you that it is the answer to all of your problems.
Exactly.
But yet, back to your point earlier, there's still a group of humans that, this is hard. I don't know. And the fear, like, is this going to take something away from me? Do I lose something? And even sometimes just landing the plane long enough to refuel, you don't have time. You're running so fast. I don't have time to try a new thing today. I'm just too busy. I'm assuming the construction industry is rife with that reality. I'm not even going to call it a story or an excuse. It's reality.
The construction industry, I would say, is, I don't want to color this in a negative way, but the construction industry is one that has not necessarily embraced change, yet I would say has the greatest gains at its fingertips.
So let's talk. We can cap on this one for at least another. I know that's it's like. Is it simply because of it's one of those industries I was reading the other day about it as I was doing some research on modular of it's an industry that it's one of the few things that's taking us longer to do the same things we did before. And then there was another argument that's but think of the regulatory, think of the environmental factors, think of the thought that's going to construction. We've made it more, which has just compressed everything, including budgets, timelines, skills for the workers. But it's one of the few industries that it takes you longer to build the thing than it did, where everything else is getting faster. It's not. But we're asking different things of it. What's your perspective on the balance between those? Hey, I want you to do it better and faster while adding in all these other levels of things that we didn't make you think about 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And, including reporting itself. And we heard this from safety in the 90s. How am I supposed to do my job? Now I have to do all this paperwork. And that's still a prevailing, I would say, woe and struggle. But it's how do we ask more? How do we make things... Let me say this again. How do we make easier the additional things that we're asking? So yes, we know that we're going to have to ask more. We know that the requirements are different, but how do we lessen the burden of those things? I would say, construction, the fact that our productivity and our efficiency rates are going down, that is something that irks me in my heart based on, sort of my career as an analyst.
As a project manager, that's your kryptonite. Absolutely.
And here's just a new thought that's coming to mind. So in certain industries, change is initiated from sort of the bottom. New ideas come out of school, and so the new hires are pushing the way that's going to be. Construction being largely trades-based, largely mentorship. We're talking about senior workers training the workers below them.
The apprenticeship,
on the job.
The journey, the 20-year practitioner, the master at the craft. Absolutely, yeah.
So inherently, by that nature, it is something where the old ways prevail and get passed on, rather than this regeneration and refresh of ideas and ways from the new employees.
It almost eats its new ideas just by the way it's the way it's structured.
Absolutely.
But you've got safety, you've got speed, you got demands. There's so many factors. And let's get real. How do we break that cycle? How do we change it? I don't want to break it and proving it's wrong, but how do we shift it in a way that leaves us better off 10 years from now? Because the next 10 years is going to pass no matter what. So I don't have time to change it, but the time is still ticking by. Any thoughts from your perspective? And now you're getting out your crystal ball of how to change the future.
Yes.
How would we approach it to respect what it needs to be to function and yet inject it with some new ways of doing things?
Ooh, it's a big question. So one of the things that comes to mind is sort of that change fatigue, right? Everyone has heard of the silver bullet that's going to solve all our problems, and
we've all been shot with it from time to time.
Exactly. So that might be a new app. It might be a new process. It's a new ERP, and the number of times that those have been tried but then not successfully adopted, it just means that there's less and less faith that the next one will work, and therefore less passion and commitment towards adoption. So in some ways, we're sort of a victim to the solutions before us that haven't worked. How do we change it, though? Leadership obviously has to come into play. I'm always have been. I'm a big proponent of leadership and the role that plays. I come from the military, so where leadership is everything. And so if our leaders are willing to embrace, if our leaders are willing to empathize with what are the challenges that stand in the way of embracing change or stand in the way of embracing innovation, it's that leadership empathy that I think changes then senior workers in the construction industry, and then can sort of help to onboard them. But when we're talking about something that's just been flat implemented, typically, if it's just a direction given, it's an order given, typically you're not going to get a whole lot of buy-in.
I've had a few guests on, one specifically, Matt Farr, CEO of a large trucking company, and they talked about, he was very honest about, we were going to do digital transformation and we decided what it was going to be, and then we pushed it down. Complete and utter failure. Zero adoption, didn't work, just made everybody's life more hectic, and it was more things to do, not how's this going to make me better. Flipped the whole thing, went back to like bottom up approach, complete different change, and small little bite-sized initiatives, not big monster changes. And I've often been impressed. I think meeting large organizations, they'll talk about like an automation innovation, and it was just automating the most simplest thing, but it was a win and it worked. So they were celebrating it. When you look at this enterprise level organization, they're celebrating the automation of expense reports. That was one. And they're like, we saved X amount of hours times X amount of employees. Like it was huge, but it was so simple from the outside, or easy to overinterpret it as simple, maybe is what I should say.
I think that is so true. It is typically those small pain points. So start there rather than changing the whole organization with these big, broad, sweeping changes. Understand what are the things that people struggle with on the day to day. What are the things that cause them weekly headaches.
That really kind of supports the argument or the case for the fact that maybe the top senior level leaders aren't the best for that, because if you're sitting at a senior role and you're a visionary and you're looking big, you're looking broad, versus supporting and then letting the individuals who are physically doing the thing try the small changes, try the small. It's almost getting it in the right bucket of who's looking how far down the runway, right?
Fair enough. So how could we put it this way? Let leaders lead. The leaders have to be committed to enabling the change, facilitating it. Hey, they're going to be the ones writing the checks, but let's put the right people in the roles to identify what are the pain points, identify what actually needs to be adjusted. And so those who are doing the doing are empowered to actually implement impactful change.
In the construction industry specifically, especially heavy, is that at the project management level? Is that like who would be, I don't understand the roles enough of the hierarchy, like who would be the best, where's the best place to allocate that responsibility, to give that opportunity, maybe is a better way to say it.
Mm-hmm. Of the doing?
Yeah, of like you said, of like give it to the people that, set the tone, open the door. But is it at the project management level? Is it at someone who's visioning what the project could be, or is it that a series of fractions kind of up and down the chain of command, if you will, of who's really going to champion it versus who's going to get to do it on a Tuesday morning at 10? I always joke like it's Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. What you do then is really what the role is.
That's a good one. Well, like we said, like let doers do. So those who are actually facing the problem, dealing with the problem, they're in the best position to understand what needs to change in order to see that problem dissolve. The empowerment, though, from leadership is really interesting. So we both know Brenda Beckendorf, Society 5.0.
Yes, very well. Yeah, I'm another the person I'm a raving fan of. Exactly.
Yeah, just phenomenal. And the view from Society 5.0 is really we need leaders to be behind the change. We need leaders to adopt and encourage innovation and technological change. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the ones doing. And yes, let's inform them on how to identify those champions. Let's inform them on how to sort of listen to the problems. But our industry has seen no shortage of, technological people from the bottom saying, hey, I've got a great idea, but trying to push that up to leadership. It's like trying to push a rope uphill, and you don't always get sort of the stage time that you need. But if we can get leaders understanding and executive circles understanding that this is how you're going to make impactful change. This is how you're going to create that differentiation. This is how you're going to see productivity gains that can separate, especially when we talk about construction, the labor force. You're talking about masses of people, and it's really hard to differentiate from one body to the next. And productivity it's sort of at our fingertips, but it needs to be well facilitated.
Creating space, creating permission, being a champion, leading by example where appropriate. Like a lot of the terms that are becoming more commonplace, but not always the envision of the leadership team who had all the answers, and the myth and the illusion that goes with that.
Exactly.
The omnipotent all-knowing. You touched on labor force.
Yes.
Challenges. Everyone I talk to is having challenges. What are you seeing at kind of the major projects level? And more importantly, what's going to stay the same around that, and what's going to change, or what do you see when we get back to the crystal ball?
Mm-hmm. Labor attraction and attraction into trades. I think that's a challenge. And it is something that it's sort of an exciting challenge to approach.
Your positivity is infectious, Luticia. It's a challenge, but I'm very positive about it.
It is a challenge. And so, I think let me pause there. So labor attraction and attraction into the trades is definitely a challenge, and I think it's something that we're seeing in industries across the board. It's not solely within construction. How do we address that challenge? How do we approach it? Part of that is by making an inclusive environment. I got into heavy construction as a 20-year-old female in northern Alberta, and for many, many years I was the only female on site. It was something like I didn't see a problem with it because I came from the military. It was a dynamic I was used to, but certainly if I extricate myself from my own experience, that could be a really daunting sort of experience. We look at that, from Drive Modular in our workforce accommodations. That's a consideration that we have to take into play. We're asking people to remove themselves from their friends, family, and their safe spaces in town to work in remote places. How do we make that a safe environment? How do we make that a welcoming environment? How do we make people essentially comfortable and in a good mental space to be able to focus on their work and execute safely and enjoy their time there until they get to go home to their families.
And are you seeing, obviously, the demand? Companies are going, we can't just throw people in a room and hope they're okay with it. We've got to take that extra, or else we just won't keep them. Like, it is really about, it's non-optional. It shouldn't be. It should be of course we want to give them the best opportunity, but businesses, if you can get away with things, sometimes you do. It's not even being malicious. It's just the way it's always been. But I can only imagine someone spends their first 2 weeks up in camp and it's I'll be blunt, it's kind of a shithole. They're not going to go back. They're just going to not show up.
Absolutely. And this is where culture comes into play. When we talk about, mechanical company A versus mechanical company B, oftentimes, unless there's a major differentiator, those workforces can traverse back and forth. Yeah. But it's when a company has a culture, a brand, and are willing to open arms, embrace people into that culture, that's what makes it a sticky place to be. That's what helps for worker retention. That's what makes people excited to go to work. And that's what essentially differentiates in terms of productivity, because your turnaround is directly related to your productivity. So how do you keep people with you? And culture is one of the best places to start. So,
and there is no illusion that the line falls right to the bottom line. Like you said, if you can't keep the people and you're cycling in new people, your productivity is down, and that's how you make your project work. And that's how you make that last little bit of money that's made right at the end of the project, as I've been told by many people in construction. The end is where you blow it.
So true.
Or make it.
The final 5%.
Yes. Is it 5? Okay. I had 10, but yes, 5. Are you seeing a big shift in companies? Like, is the get it factor increasing there? Like, hey, we don't have any choice. Like, there's probably companies that have always got it. Is there more of them? Sounds like yes. Sounds like there's no choice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's where people are recognizing they're like, Otherwise, there's nothing that differentiates us from the next guy down the road. And companies are getting it. They're getting it that there's very little that differentiates them from the next company down the road. And it's going to be culture. It's got to be caring. And there's also something that I've been hearing. So in terms of culture, or sort of subsequent to culture, is relationships. At the heart of culture is relationships. And there's actually a good colleague of mine, Lucy Hamill, she talks a lot about relationship-based safety. And the whole concept behind this is that, if you don't have a relationship with the person who's working alongside you, then it's a lot easier to miss, say, early warning signs that there could be a safety issue. When you know the person and you know sort of how they operate and what their personality is like, then they're having an off day. You can have eyes on that, and you can perceive that maybe today isn't a great day for them to be, say, on the tools. So it just really highlights the importance of relationships, and relationships are at the heart of culture, and creating a family out of the workplace. I think there's a lot of companies that claim to be, a family.
That word gets thrown around a little bit.
It does get thrown around, but what are you willing to do to back that up? What are you willing to commit to cultivate those relationships in a meaningful way?
And what does it actually mean? Because family can be a dysfunctional thing, but like knowing someone well enough to know when they're not. I love that example so much. And from your experience with the military, would you say that was like? I've had some friends. I've had some great coaches over the years that were ex-military leaders, and they talked about that camaraderie, that need to have the back of the person beside you, so they have your back. And it just kind of pulled a thread on having that conversation about how when the bullets are flying and when you're in the shit, you really need to know that person beside you has got your back that way. That, to me, that's a great way to permeate that. And I don't know, that it just clicked a memory of a conversation I had a couple of years ago.
It's everything, and it's sort of the encapsulation of all of those words that we throw around. We're talking about family, we're talking about relationships, but trust too. How do we build
the
trust?
Base of the pyramid. Yeah, you don't have that, the rest there's not much to build on. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh, and it doesn't matter who you are, or how thick your shell is, or how big your armor is. Those things are just, they're universally true, I think, if I'm being so bold to say. No matter how much some of us try to hide them or push them down. Oh, I'm going to act that way. Come on, we act this way. But underneath, when someone's got your back. I appreciate the humanity that you're kind of bringing to the dialogue. We could have just talked about big, large CapEx projects in Northern Alberta. But what we're talking about is the people that show up to make those projects a success. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I really like that word, humanity. We've all heard, our people come first, but it's the humans within that. It's the human side of things. Again, that's something that we focus on at Drive. We recognize that, the workforce that we pull into remote areas to execute projects, yes, they're workers, but they're also people. They're also people who are working away from their families, who probably miss their kids, who have stressors going on at home. So what can we do to make their time away from home manageable, stress-free, a bit of that home away from home, and a healthy environment? Isolation is a challenge.
So one, most importantly, just so they can come back, two, and they're going to be more productive. Like, there is a clear business case for this. It's not just fluffy stuff.
Oh, completely. It was the Navy who first figured out, how do you get the best morale out of people and thus productivity is clean accommodations and good food. So these are the building blocks of how do we keep people happy, and therefore how do we keep them performing? And that shouldn't be a lot to ask.
It doesn't sound complicated. I have heard from some people that work away, and they're like, "Oh, the food is amazing. I gained. Oh my God, it's too much. It's too much. I gained some weight. I come back home fatter than I left." But it was said in a very positive way. It's not like, "Oh, the food's crap there." It's like going to the all-inclusive and the food is terrible. You're like, I don't care what the deal was. It wasn't worth it. By day two, you're like, I'm out. I'm out of here. Are you seeing, like, from the perspective of net new migration? We hear on the news again. Blaming the news. We hear so many people coming to Alberta. I've lived through some boom and bust cycles. I've been here since 2000, so I've seen a few versions of this. My wife works in the energy sector. What are we seeing in terms of, like, the need around Drive? Are we seeing much more of an influx in workers? Because I've often heard, it'll never be like it was. We're more efficient. We do things differently. What are you seeing just in kind of that human capital moving in and out of the province based on need?
There's still a need. There's, when we get major projects, we're ramping up, hundreds of people at a time.
Yeah, this isn't tens of people. This is sometimes thousands of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's a lot of people just sort of lying in wait
waiting around
for their assignment. Yeah, absolutely. So we need to embrace that. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about Alberta is we have always embraced workers from other provinces, from other countries. I think it only adds to our vibrancy, and out of that, there are people who will stay. There are people who will find that Alberta is their new home, and there are things in this province that they're attracted to. I personally feel like we're like the worst kept secret. I don't know why everyone doesn't live here, but
Alberta is. People like say anything negative, I'm like, I'm not even going to get annoyed because you clearly haven't spent any time. Because what you just said is actually just this is not true. I have a lot of friends in Quebec that don't necessarily travel, not picking on Quebecers, but they tend to have opinions about things. Maybe I've known to as well in my past. And they'll say something about Alberta. I'm like, that's not even real what you just said. Like, so I'm like, check it out, or like, we're not having this conversation.
Absolutely. No, I feel for you there.
So I touched on it earlier, and we can kind of asking. So we talk about this unique thing, this like, I don't know, secret sauce, whatever that we have here that makes it just the things that we that are you can point to, but are also intangible. Any thoughts on, does that come from our ag background? Does it come from are like, hey, if we don't watch out for each other, we might not survive because we're so much closer to being a new province than other parts. Is it the energy sector? I don't know. Any thoughts on kind of what your perspective is that does drive this thing that we've talked about through our whole conversation?
I really like that question, and it makes me think of my family in the north. I was born in Keg River, which is just south of High Level, so in the far northern reaches of Alberta. And
that is way up there.
Absolutely. Yes. And so, a Cree-Métis and Ukrainian family. And as my dad put it, he said, you have to be hardy to live here. You have to be hardy to survive. So no strangers to hard work, are we? No strangers of looking out for your neighbor because, you're in sparsely populated areas in really, tremendously difficult climates, and I think that's just a part of how we are. And you just buckle down, you get the thing done, and you sort of celebrate as a community.
And you help each other, because I grew up in a small town in southern Quebec, and whether you liked your neighbor or didn't like your neighbor, or I've had a falling out with your neighbor, if they had something go wrong, you would still go and help them, because that's just the way it was. And like, everyone would put their bullshit aside and would do the thing. And I couldn't maybe move away from that community fast enough. But as I get older, as many of us do, we look back and go, oh, I see where all that came from. Man, how fortunate was I to grow up in that environment.
I have to say, when I visit family up in Peace River, I see it full face, and it's sort of, on one hand, it shocks me, it warms my heart, and another makes me a little bit sad that we don't operate that way to the same degree in Southern. So maybe it's something that we can bring from the North and apply in our everyday down here.
We have threads. We have green shoots of it. And the more we understand what it is or where it comes from, maybe the more deliberate we can be. And I think that growing up in a small community and just the grit, because you had no choice. Yes. Necessity is still the mother of all innovation, or survival, maybe. Luticia, thanks for coming on and just, again, having a very human conversation. I quite enjoy that. As we talk about heavy construction with a very human lens and the reality of our ability to get things done, because we need these things to move our society forward. If people feel run over by it, you can see why that creates resistance. But I hope we're kind of working our way to a better cycle, because our demand for energy, our demand for infrastructure, these things aren't going away. So how do we just, quote unquote, do a better job of it in a more inclusive, safe way?
I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been really awesome, Tyler. So thank you.
My pleasure. It was a joy. I would do, as I always joke, I do this if nobody listens, but they kind of do. So it makes it somewhat justified, this amazing chat. I get to talk with cool people about the things that they're the most excited about. Could you really ask for a better formula for a conversation? What's the best, how should people reach out to you? You've got a lot on the go. You're involved with a lot of things, which I love. You're a big part of many different communities altogether. What's the best way for someone to get in touch with you, to have a chat, or maybe engage with you on Drive, or just give us your coordinates?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say, LinkedIn is the grand melting pot of our era,
It
and
is.
I'm fairly active on there. So find me on LinkedIn, or reach out, Luticia at drive-mod.com. I'm sure we have some show notes. We can drop that in.
Yes, we will absolutely point all the directions, but I love to give people the easy and, hey, I'm excited, I'm motivated. I'm like, this whole point of the show is to get people curious about two things. They go, oh, I'm curious. I want to learn more. Go down whatever rabbit hole that kind of popped up for you. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time. And I look forward to crossing paths again because it's Alberta. We will. It's just how it goes.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Tyler.
Thank you.